I'd like to invite up to the stage my three panelists. So Dr. BECHARA CHOUCAIR, right, from Kaiser Permanente, which, as all of you know, is one of the leading healthcare organizations in the United States. Juan Gonzalez Valero, who's the head of sustainability and responsible business at Syngenta, which is an agricultural technology company. And third, Alex LUZARRAGA, who's the VP of Corporate Strategy at Medeiros, which is a IT company that focuses on the hospitality sector. So we have three very different sectors here, industries that we'll be talking about, following up from George's presentation a little bit on, in particular, the whole focus on how do organizations kind of move from the more traditional ways of doing business towards really integrating this kind of inclusive growth or new approaches into the core part of your business strategy. And in effect, it is a kind of innovation, ultimately, for the organizations, and not just within, but also as you relate to the community and the other actors in the system. So what I'd like to do is ask, maybe starting with you, Dr. or BECHARA, let me say, let's all, and we'll just go one by one and maybe spend each one 5 minutes just talking a little bit about that, who you are, what the organization is, and what that journey has looked like for you.
Sure, I'm happy to start. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to spend part of this morning with you. So my name is BECHARA CHOUCAIR, and I serve as the Chief Community Health Officer at Kaiser Permanente. For those of you who don't know Kaiser Permanente, we are the largest not-for-profit integrated healthcare system in the country. We are based out of in California, but we provide services. We provide both care and coverage to 12.4 million people across this country in 8 states, including Washington, D.C. as well, mostly on the West Coast, but also in Maryland, Virginia, Colorado, and Georgia. So as an organization, we started around 75 years ago, and we've had the same exact mission since we were founded. And it is about improving the health and well-being of our members and improving the health and well-being of communities. And over the years, we came to realize that those truly go hand in hand. Because if you think about it, there is no way we can improve the health and well-being of communities if we don't do a really good job at improving the health and well-being of our 12.4 million members. But at the same time, there is no way we can optimize the health and well-being of our 12.4 million members if we don't focus on the conditions that creates health in the communities where those members live. And when we do that, when we start thinking about what really is creating health in those communities where people are living, that's where not only our members would benefit, but really all 68 million people who live in communities where Kaiser Permanente operates would benefit. And that's really was the driver behind our journey from, to George's point, from focusing on the compliance piece, being a not-for-profit organization and having to make sure that we're conducting community health needs assessment, investing in community benefit, to this journey that's truly about improving the health and well-being of communities as a core part of our business strategy as an organization. Because we do truly believe that to improve the health and well-being of our members, we do have to be thinking about those conditions that create health. And that's where we started thinking about not just what happens within the 4 walls of our hospitals and medical office building, but we started thinking about things like housing. We started thinking about things like transportation, like access to food, things that are related to social isolation, or do people have enough income? Are they getting out of poverty? Because those are truly factors that drive health probably a lot more than what happens within the 4 buildings, the 4 walls of our medical office building. And that's how the story, that's how the journey started, and I'm looking forward to further discussion throughout the panel.
Thank you. That's terrific. Good, great start. So Juan, at Syngenta, I know you had started quite a few years ago with a very ambitious sustainability plan, which you called the Good Growth Plan, and yet you decided as an organization to take a little step back and reassess. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can try to summarize a little bit the journey without taking the whole 45 minutes, I hope. Listening to George actually reminded me of many of the steps and the learnings that we did within the organization. We are one of those industries that actually produces stuff that most people don't want. You produce crop protection product or pesticides that are extremely necessary for farmers, but the majority of people don't have a relationship to farming anymore these days. Means that the understanding of why a product is needed that has intrinsic properties that you probably don't like is very difficult. So you're one of those industries that has to think hard about how to position that. Of course, we also produce seeds that is a bit less controversial, but can be contested as well in some places. So that's why we already it's now 15 or more years ago, we actually thought about changing a little bit the way we want to measure the impact that we're having on the ground, and that's why we created the Good Growth Plan, what was essentially a means to measure that the technology that we produce, and we are a technology company, is really serving the people that manage the land. The problem with that is that you don't really talk a lot about your products. And that's what actually enlightened me listening to George, because that's exactly what we went through over the last year and a half, I would argue. We still stand to the Good Growth Plan and we will evolve it, but one critical component was missing in the Good Growth Plan that really focused more on resource efficiency on the farm, on environmental metrics, and on social and farmer metric, essentially. What was missing is, where's the product in this whole thing? And that led to two disconnects that were quite fundamental. The first one is that many of the critiques actually said the Good Growth Plan is nice and we believe you're actually having impact, but we don't like your products. What are you doing about that? And the other one is actually internal with the employees, exactly like George said, is if a big part of the organization is actually geared up in all its processes to develop new molecules that actually serve the farmer, how do you explain the link to the sustainability agenda of those products if it's not part of the decision-making criteria in its early stage? So last year we decided to actually take a step back and take a different approach. And what we did is actually we consulted with external stakeholders, very critical stakeholders, and went through what we called listening sessions with them to understand what can we do better in this space? What do you expect from us? What is it that would be material from your perspective? But not in the sense of a typical materiality analysis, more in terms of what do you expect the products to do. And we consulted with, I think, more than 600 people in total, internal and external. So the employees was also quite interesting to get their perspective in there. And the outcome was actually quite interesting. You know, first of all, it's not all negative. What is in this business sometimes overruling some of the other things, the negative perceptions that many people have. So a large part of people actually responded that we understand that we need pesticides. We just don't want them in our food. Let's be explicit. You know, you might need to use them, but do it in a way that keeps them away from my plate. The other thing that we saw is we want you to see that you're not sticking that you really create impact with those products that goes beyond just your own profitability. How do you really demonstrate that these products are really needed for a more sustainable agricultural system. So that was the other very significant feedback. And then, of course, there was something as, how do you really channel your investments towards the right things? How can we trust you that you are making decisions that are actually good for us as a society and not just for you as the one that runs the business? This is listening, so you don't respond. But of course, we went back and said, how can we respond to that listening in a way? And that's when we actually launched now in April, essentially our new commitments that we call accelerating innovation. We are an innovation company. We have some 28,000 employees around the world, of which roughly 4,000 to 5,000 are just within R&D. We invest 10% of our revenues in research and development, so we're a real innovation company. So with accelerating innovation for a more sustainable agriculture in the interest of nature, what we actually did is actually bring it to the core of our business model, this innovation-driven business model. And the concrete commitments are actually responding to some of the listening sessions. The first one is invest where it matters for society and nature. What actually means that you need to look at the investments more from what are those market segments where you want to grow versus those where you want just to be there and not grow as fast as in other. So how do you define those sustainable market segments in agriculture? What is not easy because it's not black and white. So this is a really tough one for us. The other one is we want to innovate with society and nature, or guided by society and nature, what actually means that we have to fundamentally change and adopt our innovation model. So what you actually do when selecting a new molecule or a new trait, how do you actually get those aspects that are necessary for a more sustainable system and that your stakeholders actually expect? How do you integrate that in the new products that will be in the market maybe in 10, 15 years? So that's the other thing. So bring it down to the core innovation components. And the third one that we committed to is actually to reduce the residues in food and the environment. And that's essentially a commitment to more collaboration with value chain partners, because you can't do that without the value chain. You have to do it with your farmers, but you actually need to do it in collaboration with those that actually buy from the farmers, so you have the whole value creation in mind. We are intensifying that work, and of course we want to be much, much more transparent about all the three things in order to start building trust. That's where we are at the moment. We are developing KPIs in order to reflect that in a meaningful way, and we will announce them later in the year or early next year, and that's the evolution we are going through at this point in time. So I would have loved to read your research maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It would have made my journey easier, but here we are.
Thank you very much. So Alex, it's a hospitality technology company, a few steps removed, I guess, from the ultimate travelers, etc. How are you seeing yourself as a possible catalyst of positive impact in this space?
Very good. So let me maybe start by a small introduction. So my name is Alex LUZARRAGA. I've been running the strategy department of Medeiros in the last 8 years. And since January, now I'm in an innovation unit based on data and very focused on destinations. Medeiros is a technology company, as you said. We are what you can call a B2B. We work with hospitality, with hotels, accommodation players, but also with airlines. For those of you that are more familiar with the North American market, we started as a competitor of Sabre, which is a US-based system, 30 years ago. And since then, we started diversifying from airlines into airports, hotels, cruise companies, travel agencies and online travel agencies, car rentals, etc. So we are one of those very strange animals where we can see the travel journey, the traveler journey from the outside, and we can connect all those players. And it's, I think, a very particular kind of industry in the sense that those players typically don't speak with each other. They all keep their own systems, their own technology, their own data, the information about the traveler. So there is a lot of a tradition of lack of collaboration, not for any bad purpose, but just because it's been like that for decades. And now with systems and technology, there is a very important opportunity to connect all these players and also make the journey seamless, make it much more convenient for the traveler and also for the ecosystem, for society. And this is one of our focus, try to partner with all those players to try to have a better approach to the travel experience and the traveler. No? So this is what we are in a nutshell. And what we are, maybe just to comment a bit, what we are doing in this space and also with the help of Palladium is to understand how travel, who's been historically very good news for societies, is a driver of change, a driver of good news, sometimes is changing into a kind of bad impact. And this is increasingly happening because travel tends to grow over GDP. So we can only expect that more airports will be constructed, more people will be traveling, people will be flying more often, etc., etc. And if you think of the recent news from newspapers in the last few years, you can see how more and more overcrowded destinations, for example, are struggling with visitors. There is an increasing divide between visitors and locals, and there is even antagonism in some places. There is also a growing, let's say, weight of big players that don't involve local communities. So there are some studies that show that less than 5% of the value chain is captured by the local providers, the local communities, out of the total traveler spend. So 95% is captured by the airline, the big hotel, or the big companies. And also from an ecosystem, from an environmental impact aspect, there is one of the few industries that is actually increasing the carbon emissions, if we speak about airlines. So there are movements like Shame to Fly. Probably you are familiar with that. This started in Sweden, where people actually are starting to hide that they fly because they are a bit ashamed of that. No? So even in an industry that is like almost selling ice cream, which is fantastic, you only travel for the good, there are bad aspects. And I think those aspects, as George was commenting before, are also opportunities for all these players to position themselves in a differentiated aspect. So positive impact is also about your values as a customer and about the experience that you may have in your travel. So very often you won't remember the room in the hotel or the seat on the plane, but you will remember some particular parts of your trip. And most of those are connected to your values and your emotions. So this is the future of travel, how you can make better experiences, and there is an opportunity to differentiate for all these players their offering through this.
So, BECHARA, just to follow up a little bit, you talked about focusing on the broader health outcomes as it relates to your communities. How within the organization and with some of these other players, what does that innovation process look like? I know you have, one of the things that caught our eye at one point was this program you have with an investment fund that invests in low-cost housing. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about, and how do you get that internal innovation happening, that big new idea?
Sure. So as a not-for-profit healthcare organization, we conduct regularly community health needs assessments. And we do those in 39 of our communities across the country. And we've been seeing regularly that the housing issue's been bubbling up as a significant health issue in our communities. So over the years, we've been trying to figure out what's really our role in housing as a health organization. And we've invested in supporting community-based organizations that are working with people who are on the streets. We've invested in legal aid organizations. We've provided some grant support to other organizations that are supporting people in this entity, but in this issue, dealing with this issue. But we've always realized that there's something big that we can do that's going to have to be bold, that's going to have to engage a lot more organizations, a lot more government entities, a lot more other organizations, whether for-profit or not-for-profit. And that's when we stepped up and said, we want to make a bold statement and say, we're going to make a difference on improving and enhancing affordability of housing in our communities. And we know we can't do this on our own. So in addition to the grants making that we make regularly, and we invested tens of millions of dollars in grants, we've partnered with the Treasury Department, and we said, is there a way that we can take some of the money that we invest in the market, and instead of just focusing on those dollars to give us back financial return on investment, we wanted still to have financial return on investment, but we really wanted to have a social return on investment. And what would that look like? And that's how the journey started with our Treasury Department. I would say a couple of years ago now. It engaged the board directly, our finance committee of the board, our community health committee of the board, and as a result, we got a commitment to dedicate $200 million to invest in projects that would still give us some financial return on investment, but most importantly, will preserve or expand affordable housing in our communities. And that's really the start of our $200 million journey on affordable housing and impact investment. And since then, we've already created 2 funds to help us with that. There's an equity fund that's mostly focused on the Bay Area. For those of you here who are familiar with the housing issues in the Bay Area, it's a significant problem, and we've created a low interest loan pool, about $100 million that's available to preserve and expand affordable housing across our footprint.
Just as a quick follow-up, how would you link that also to the health side of things or the health outcomes? Is that something you're trying to track, or is it too soon still?
We are tracking that. So again, we are in a health business. We don't know how to do to build housing or preserve affordability. So that's why we had to partner with the right organizations. So we've partnered with Enterprise Community Solution. It's one of the community development finance institutions. It's actually one of the largest in the country, to help us administer both of these funds. And on the equity side, we've closed our first deal back in May in East Oakland, where there was a multi-unit building that's the affordability was getting ready to go away, and people in those multi-unit buildings were at risk of losing their housing. So we've partnered with Enterprise and a not-for-profit community developer in the community to preserve affordability for that multi-unit housing. And as part of the condition to be able to tap into those investment funds, we wanted to make sure there's a health plan in each one of those developments. So we're addressing not just the housing piece of people living in those buildings, but really have a health plan that looks into the health and well-being of the residents, but also of the policies and the systems in those developments to make sure that we're keeping an eye on health.
So Juan, to follow up a little bit on what you were talking about, obviously you're starting this newer chapter of the journey. What do you see as the main challenges, both internally in terms of, because I assume you have a lot of people that are used to doing things a certain way, and salespeople and research people, et cetera. How do you get them engaged into the new vision? And then externally, you also talked about needing to work with other value chain partners. How do you get them engaged in sharing the common vision?
Well, I'm not sure it's a challenge, to be honest. It's a journey. And whatever we do in this space is not easy, because you have to change the ways of working in many respects. Internally, I think we are seeing momentum creating, really significant momentum creating. it was really a boost. And again, it reminded me what George said. We could observe it. Once we launched the commitments, the new ones, you know, and they were really linked to some of the innovation targets, the R&D community is excited, you know, and they're taking it on. As a matter of fact, I'm not involved or only peripheral involved. It's their program now to actually come up with a more inclusive scorecard and see how they can make better decisions in earlier stages. And then how we actually do that throughout the stage plan of a development of a new compound. That's a project that is now in full-fledged. It was launched through the function, not through us. So you can see momentum building up. On the commercial side, you see the same enthusiasm because there is segments out there that are actually looking for more sustainable solutions, if you want to call it like that. So how do you really shape the portfolio to actually fulfill those needs, you know, especially in the low residue environment? You know, this residue discussion is interesting because residues are not harmful per se. That's how it's regulated, but still there is segments that want to actually go far below, and how do you support them without impacting the productivity of the farm? What is not an easy thing. You need to find a good compromise with doing it. And that's where you start finding more integrated programs, where you start combining other solutions, biological solutions, for example, that make up a big part of the portfolio in the meanwhile. So you can see that happening, and that's also carried now by those units in those countries that have those market segments. And the third one, I would argue, the external, the value chain relationship, the reaction was very positive on the announcement, and I think we're having really more granular dialogues now about what we're doing. The importance there is to really work with the sourcing departments, so the procurement within those organizations that really have to secure the supply for their organizations rather than the sustainability ones. And the more advanced value chain partners have combined that anyway, so you have a much more consistent dialogue about these things. And I think with what we are doing at supporting the farmer bottom up, and what they're doing supporting the farmer then through their purchasing power and the security that they can offer, that will generate much more momentum. I think we are only at the beginning of what can be done. And it's really observing that then your products are actually the driver of the impact that you want to generate. And that's hopefully the outcome. Just don't know how to measure it yet.
Okay. Excellent. So, Alex, I know you guys have focused or identified, I think, 4 broad areas, right, where you think you can really have positive impact. Maybe you could just quickly, again, summarize what those are, and maybe just describe one of those and how you would.
Yes, because we wanted to go one step down, not from positive impact to exactly what this means, how you can translate it into very concrete. So we decided to focus in 4 areas. One is overcrowded destinations. The second one is how you can embrace diversity in travel. So make sure that everyone can travel, aging people, people with mobility problems, people with food intolerance, with how you can make sure that the whole society is benefiting from travel. The third one is how you can involve the local communities into the value chain. And the last one is an environmental impact. And I think maybe back to your point on innovation, having been in the past very close also to innovation, one of the efforts we did in the last years was to connect innovation with a strategy. In one way of describing innovation, in my opinion, is innovation is what enables your strategy. Otherwise, you are doing something else, but it's not innovation or business innovation. No? And I think that as long as you include in your strategy sustainability and positive impact, you will see this connection happening. Your innovation also has to be very connected to your positive impact. And a couple of examples I can share here, for example, on overcrowded destinations, you start seeing how the most sophisticated destinations like Amsterdam or Barcelona, for example, actually what they want is to have less visitors, or not to have so many concentrations of tourists. So actually, technology is designed to bring, and data, to bring people in. Actually, these destinations want people out. What we observe from them is that actually what they think is that they could invite tourists to visit the countryside and spend nights in the region rather than staying in the city. But for that, visitors need information, need data, need some tools. That's an example of an innovative change. No? Another one is a platform we are constructing for the use of destinations or hotels where they can customize a lot their local offering, making kind of packages of things that have an emotional link with the visitors and make sense. And it's a kind of very useful, very easy to use platform that we are piloting with some customers. And also from the, maybe last example, from the environmental angle, and coming back to my point where I said that for the first time, for example, last year in the European Union, an airline was at the top 10 of most carbon emission companies. So it's sad to see that while other verticals are decreasing their emissions, airlines are increasing. No? And we are piloting a calculator or a technology based on the International Civil Aviation Organization. This entity has a calculator that provides you with how many emissions your flight is doing or is causing. So we are piloting with some travel agencies, with some customers, with some airlines, how you can translate that calculator into a search topic. So you, instead of looking to the cheapest flight or to the shortest flight, you can sort your flights based on the carbon emissions, and you could opt to look for the less impacting one. No? And all this also has a lot of derivatives for airlines, so they can actually design routes that are friendlier with this type of technology. They can also know how or measure how much they are polluting, and they can even use this information for then offset with emission rights later, once in a year. So there are a lot of derivatives of this type of technology. Those are three examples. There are more, but I think is the way we are doing. Yeah.
Great. Maybe as just a last round, and then we'll open it for a few questions, which is just if you could summarize for the group, what advice would you give other organizations, right? And in particular, how to use this kind of thinking as sort of this idea of a real differentiator in the market as opposed to just something that everyone is doing.
I'm happy to start here, and my colleagues here could add whatever they'd want to, whatever they think could be helpful. From my perspective, I think it's really important to tie this work to your core business strategy. And you don't want this work to be sitting kind of like on the side, the right thing to do, the nice thing to do. You'd want it to be just really core to your business strategy. The second thing I think it's really important is you'd want to make sure that there is buy-in all over your organization, starting from the board, but also to George's description that there's that motivation and there's that excitement from your employees, and we can feel that at Kaiser Permanente all along. I mean, we have over 200,000 employees, we have 23,000 physicians, and anytime we talk about our community health work, it's really energizes the organization. And the third piece is we want to make sure that you're dedicating real resources to support this work. It's great to have kind of nice stories and blogs and your intranet talking about this. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that there are real resources that are dedicated to support this work. I mean, at Kaiser Permanente, we're an $80+ billion organization. But then we make sure that we're investing every year over $2.8 billion to support this work. So it's not just things that happen on the side. It's really core to what we do. So those would be like the top three things that would come to mind.
I think I can echo nearly all of them. It is what is fundamental. Invest where it matters. That's the thing, because that's one of the tools that you have as an organization. The other one is innovate where it matters or for what it matters, and bring it to your core strategies. I think that's what it is, and or link it to the core strategies that in our case is innovation and investment driven. I think that's the thing. Maybe there's another aspect that I would like to point out in this respect. It is the inclusivity of how you actually start shifting. And we really went through the listening sessions and with partners that are really within the organization and very critically looking within the organization on how we are adapting the whole thing. We're trying to really get those external voices also into the processes now, you know, to really see the processes. And how can you build a more transparent way in order to build the trust that those products at the end will have positive impact and not just selected impact. That's what we hope for. I think that element of transparency is something that we are all in a learning curve, how to do it, because you don't want to disclose your secrets. That's your competitive advantage. But you have to disclose some of your decision-making criteria, definitively, in order, and in a very transparent way, in order to actually prove that you're really investing where it matters and you're really innovating for what it matters. And that's the challenge that we really see at this point in time.
So just to follow up, I assume that means as you define these KPIs, making sure it's measures that are meaningful to other actors, right? And then you can share those around the outcomes that George was talking about.
It needs to be, the KPIs need to be the right ones, but it's more than the KPIs, because many of the decisions are not just KPIs, they're process-driven decisions. You know, what are the criteria that you apply in the various internal processes? You know, we are all process-driven organizations, that's how we function. How do you adjust them, you know, and have you the right tools in place in order to make then the right decision and balance the decision in the right way? And how do you communicate that? Because, again, you don't want to disclose 5 years ahead what you have in pipeline. You know, you want to actually keep your competitive advantage, but you want to disclose when it comes to the point in time that you've considered the things and you maybe did the extra tests that were necessary in order to prove, and so on and so on. That's the trick, and we are not 100% sure how it's going to work yet.
Okay. Alex, any words of wisdom?
Yeah, a couple of observations. So first is probably the realize that this is a multi-year type of project. You cannot fix it in 1 year. I liked particularly one slide from George where you had like the 3 phases, like compliance, then you start having operational efficiencies, and the last stage is innovation and growth. Don't pretend to go to the last stage at the beginning. I think this is a multi-year process, and you cannot run before walking, okay? So having said that, I think you need really to focus on the positive aspect of what you want to achieve. So most of these things actually are opportunities, are strategy opportunities, business opportunities, and I believe the accent has to be in this aspect. Most of the, even if you are selling carbon or selling sweet drinks or whatever, I'm sure there are a lot of things you can do to flip the challenge and make it an opportunity from the business angle. No? So focus on that. And the last thing, to go through that multi-year journey, I think it's essential to involve the senior management. So make sure that the board and the CEO understand what you're talking about. And that's essential, I believe.
Excellent. Well, we have about a couple minutes for questions. We have a really interesting folks, if anyone would like to ask questions. And there's a mic coming over to you.
Good morning, and thank you for a very useful session. Alex, my question is to you. I come from the British Virgin Islands, and we're recovering the territory after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, which is a pretty substantial job. One of the emphasis we're putting on is getting the tourism back up and running. Here's the question. we have a lot of cruise ships, and you've talked a lot about airlines. Very similar kind of package, very similar sort of environmental pollution aspects around it. We have a good, and we measure the impact that they have on our local economy. So the average person that steps off a cruise ship has gone from $79 to $84 this year, which is a t-shirt, a cap, and a few drinks. The question is, and we get 2,000 or 3,000 at a time, or 4,000 or 5,000 if we get more of the 2 or 3 of these ships arriving. The thing is, we're talking to them about how do you make a meaningful impact on the economy, because we need money spent in the economy. The UN valued the damages at about 2.6 billion, which is 10 times the GDP of the country. So we're talking to them and saying, how do you put more value, because we know how little has been spent. And they talk about agriculture, tours and things like this. But in actual fact, the only offering they want is to go to the beach or have a drive around. The question I want to ask you, to change the behaviour of, in this case, cruise ships, but it also applies to the airlines that fly in, you've got to do more than just measure things like the carbon emissions and things like that. You've actually got to be able to give people a choice and an understanding about how little they contribute into the economies. And I talk only for the BVI, but it's the same from all across the Caribbean. I've just come from Fiji, where we've had to rebuild Fiji economy after a Category 5 cyclone there. So same problems all been replicated around the world. I'm really interested in how you, as someone operating the space, looking for impactful investment, can change the operators in a meaningful way. That's really the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think cruise companies are very, seen as a very visual example of how in a very small destination suddenly you are invaded by thousands of visitors, and the potential damage or the potential not positive impact can be very large. You know? I remember actually in one of these Palladium conferences in the previous editions that we had some representatives from cruise companies, and they shared very interesting...
One of our board members, actually.
Yes, and and I remember something that was interesting, that say that the experience in the Caribbean and in East Asia was very different from them. So actually, by designing the operations in a different fashion, and maybe starting a bit later than in the Caribbean, they learn how to involve much more, for example, local food providers or people that could have some local tours or visits to what their customers were looking for. No? I'm sure there is more that can be done, and I think that actually is difficult, as you say, because in what sense you can serve these thousands of people that are there only for a few hours and capture a larger part of the value chain is challenging. But I believe one of the points is about informing, giving information to the customers. So actually, most of them don't know even what they are visiting or what are the local problems and local challenges of the people in the destination. So I think a first step is to share more information with the travelers so they have more conscious about what they are doing. And a second thing that I believe may be done is around some technologies. I'm coming from a technology company, so it's more the aspect that I know. But some technologies that make it much easier, even through your smartphone, once you are on land, to start connecting to a network of providers that can give you this one-to-one type of relation. And it can be maybe some sports, or some kayaking, or some cooking course, or some type of local touch activities that bring you the local flavor. No? And I think that technology has a lot to do with that, because if you land 2,000 people in one shot in a place without the proper technology, this cannot be scaled, this cannot be industrialized. I hope that this can be fixed, but it's very difficult. I think it's in the travel chain is one of the most difficult things to fix, the cruise companies, because is so concentrated in a place and in a moment that is really challenging. Yeah.
Just during the networking break, hopefully some of our Palladium colleagues will approach you and talk a little bit about, because we have quite a bit of experience in this space as well that might be able to share. And any other questions? Comments? We have one here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This is really exciting, every point you are raising. My name is Justine Lukeba, and from AMS. We are in Afghanistan for 17 years, and everything you're mentioning just makes sense. But coming to really understanding the needs within the community, our services started with defense contracts supporting the military personnel. But as we spend more time in Afghanistan, particularly, we are in other countries, but Afghanistan is where we've been consistently for the last 17 years. And we're trying to shift the mindset of really towards creating shared value and creating lasting impact because of the communities we serve, and we see the need every day. So you end up working within the communities and then identifying the needs they have. So for us, it's really no longer about not wanting to share the secrets. We are a profit company, but we are also a social profit because we want to share the value with the communities we serve. So the question is really, how do you bring on board both the non-for-profit and for-profit companies to really create lasting impact to the communities we serve by collaboration, through collaboration, but also really building joint efforts. Because in Afghanistan, as you know, some of them who have been there, I know Palladium is there, we all concentrate in Kabul. And we know the capital of the cities are not necessarily the country. So Kabul is not Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is not Kabul. So we have 25 locations across the country. But the more remote we go, the more vulnerable we see how communities are really suffering. And so the question, and I think my long hours of travel, is to understand how do we bring people on board to understand that we can collaborate, we can build a partnership and impact, build long-lasting impact to the communities we serve. Just one business or one particular interest is not enough, because you see so much and then you say, I'm not going to do every service, but how do I use my innovation and partnership and networking to really impact these communities we serve?
Thank you. Bechara, maybe we'll turn to you since you're in Oakland or places like this, which where it's important to understand. And part of the question is, are you going to communities just to do something for them, or are you listening to their perspective, right?
Yeah.
Which is,
Thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for your work in Afghanistan. I had a chance to work for a human rights organization a few years back, and I got to spend some time in Iraq after the war there, helping with the rebuild. And I got a chance to spend some time in Momostenango, Guatemala, after the trouble that were happening there, and a bunch of other places across the world. And I got a chance to work here in the United States. And what I've learned across all of these years is that the work on advancing the health and well-being of a community is really need to be in a pre-competitive state. And that's what we believe in at Kaiser Permanente today. When we're addressing issues like housing or transportation or food security, we ask for help from others. We come to the table with everything we have, but most importantly is we have to be able to listen to the community. We want to make sure the community's voice is at the table. It's not what we think is right, is what we think is the community needs is what we would like to be engaged in, and creating that balance is an important piece. Again, on the housing efforts, for example, we're partnering with what others might consider as competitors, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, when you address such a critical community health issue in a community, everybody would benefit. Our members would benefit, others would benefit, the whole community will be lifted up, and that's really critical.
Great. Well, I think we've reached the end of our time, so I want to, if everyone, please join me in giving a great round of applause for our fabulous panelists.